Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today we have a special guest that I am very familiar with because I know him very well. He is my friend Richard Walker, and Richard Walker is on the other side of the country from me right now. He's over there in Virginia. I imagine he's probably sitting in Richmond, Virginia, where he lives, where I've taught classes for him in Richmond and in different places. And Richard has an organization called Bridging the Gap, and he gives education to people that I will let Richard explain about. And hello, Richard. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for asking me to be on, Sean. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's always good to talk to you. So if I like to talk to you, then other people might like to listen.
Yeah, we just might get a few folk on.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I'm ever so grateful that you've allowed us to come under the tutelage of White House Solar. We've been doing this since, wow, when did we first meet? 2018?
Yeah, something like that, probably. I remember the first time that I met you, there was somebody that was arranging classes that I didn't really like working with because he would just keep the money. And so I was waiting for him to send me the money for like previous classes. And I was looking on my app and he's like, "You promised." And then I'm parked up and I was like, "Okay, if you don't pay me, I'm not going to teach another class." I was telling him that. And so I'm sitting there on my phone looking at the app. And it didn't go in my bank yet. And up you walk to the car. And then we got along great. And I was like, well, we can't let this loser that's trying to scam me and probably is trying to scam you too ruin a good thing, which is, teaching a class to people that deserve it. So we went in and we had a great week teaching the class. And it was one of my most favorite, memorable classes too. It was in, I think, Union Hill. And it's a place where you have your family history goes to. You could tell more about this than I can. And then I ended up staying, instead of at a hotel, at the most grooviest place I ever stayed at for a class called Yogaville. And so every morning I'd wake up for class. I'd get like yoga vegan meals, and we were playing guitar. We were having a great time up there at Yogaville with Swamis that you were working on stopping a Dominion energy pipeline with for natural gas. They wanted to bring it through your homeland.
Right.
So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. And in fact, let me start with that guy. Rather than paying him, I paid you.
Yeah, that's
And declined it with him. So we went around and deleted him out of the whole process. And that's what brought you on to Union Hill.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty good example of just turning something that seems bad into a good thing, because he
Sure.
introduced us and we have like a good relationship. And
Yeah.
since he was being bad, instead of him getting some kind of percentage, he got like
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So that's the way it turns out for scammers.
Yeah. Even the gentleman that referred me to him and provided the initial funding for us, I don't even hear from him anymore. Reverend Woodbury
Uh-huh.
down in South Carolina.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I don't know, he caught an attitude with me as well.
Yeah, it seems like teaching different classes in Virginia and stuff, there could be a soap opera about some of the stuff going on there. Like there's competition for the grants,
Yeah.
but we get along great. But there's some people that are just, kind of more in it for the money. I remember one time teaching a class and they literally wheeled somebody up in a wheelchair for the solar installer class to fill up the seats.
That was in Newport News.
I'm
I
not going to
remember.
say. I don't want to get anybody in trouble.
Well, coincidentally, I was in Union Hill. I was in Buckingham on Friday
Uh-huh.
and spent time with Swami.
All right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because she wants to have solar installed she has 2 Airbnbs.
Yeah, I remember going to her house and she gave me some artwork that her mother made. And I think her mother had a really cool story too. It was like, not great, but I think she was like something to do with World War II. I can't remember exactly. You might know, her better than I do.
Yeah, she was from
Japan.
from Japan, Nagasaki. And her mother escaped and came to the United States.
Okay. Yeah.
Right before Hiroshima.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. And so I saw that same book while I was there last Friday of the drawings that her mother did. and she put it into a book,
Mm-hmm.
which was very interesting. And so she built an outdoor pizza pit.
Uh,
Yeah, which is
uh-huh.
really cool. So
Uh-huh.
she's venturing into doing pizza.
All right.
wherever
Good.
wherever that's leading to, I couldn't tell
Uh-huh.
you, but she's looking, in fact, to have a display of it during this month at some point for celebrating Earth Day. So she's inviting a bunch of folk up, and she asked me would I be willing to do a fish fry, and so we're just waiting for her to confirm the date, just as a celebration of Earth Day and reunion of all the folk that were involved with getting Dominion out of our backyard.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That was a pretty neat connection that you had with the property that your family got, or I think like right after the Civil War, and then the Yogaville. And I know that also too, the Yogaville, it's like they have their own zip code. They're in the middle of rural Virginia, and it was
Mm-hmm.
started by the Swami that did like meditation for Woodstock, like the big Woodstock
Yeah.
conference, Satyananda. Yeah.
1970. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Woodstock 69, I think, something like that.
Somewhere 69 or 70. I remember it.
Uh-huh.
I was about 12, 13 years old
Oh yeah.
when they had Woodstock, and I can tell you a story about that also. My grandfather, at the time, he was the first black moving company in New York. And so before there was a Woodstock weekend concert, we had a job in Woodstock. There's some folk moved from the city out to Woodstock. And so that was my connection to Woodstock. So when Woodstock happened, the concert, I was like, wow, I was just here,
All
you
right.
know. Yeah, and exhibited Janis Joplin and all of the other artists that were
Good old
there, Jimi
Jimi
Hendrix.
Hendrix.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was my claim to fame to Woodstock.
Hmm. Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Yeah. And I also had somebody in one of my heat spring classes that had the same name of the guy that owned the farm. I think it was called Max Yasgur's farm. And I was like, oh, your name sounds like the Woodstock. And he's like, yeah, that was my grandpa. So like,
Wow. Yeah. So, yeah, as a result of Dominion wanting to build a pipeline as well as a compressor station, that's how I met all these folk. That's how I became a staunch environmentalist.
yeah. And the pipeline was for natural gas. And I guess they have to compress it before they send the methane through the pipeline. And so they're trying to send it through your homeland.
Yeah, they wanted to connect to the present Transco line that had been there since before I was born,
Hmm.
back in the early 50s.
Hmm.
And so that's an existing pipeline that goes from Virginia all the way through Buffalo and beyond.
Dang, those freaking frackers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They created it all.
What happened with that? Like, what's the status now? I know that was like you were saying, it was maybe 2018 or something like that.
Yeah. Well, at 2020, that's when we got in front of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals for the
Hmm.
state of Virginia for this district. And the three-panel judges ruled against Dominion's permit
Hmm.
to build this pipeline, because they questioned them about why didn't you not consider using an electric compressor station? Why didn't you consider some other routes with the pipeline? How do you not know that there is a high percentage of African Americans living in that community that will be affected health wise as well as any other issues? The judge just really like got to the nitty gritty of why they're needing or building this pipeline in this historical African American community, which you alluded to. We've owned our land since 1867, which my great great grandfather purchased from his slave owner at the time, and then in 1916, his son ended up purchasing another parcel of land connecting to this that my great grandfather had gotten from the son of the slave owner. So like I said, it's been in our family for over 150 years.
That's a lot of time. And then I remember too, we did the class at that time in the Union Hill Church. And I remember there was tombstones in the backyard. So in some states, you can just get buried in your own backyard, which seems like, freedom and fair to me. Were those like relatives or that were buried there?
That's my entire family history right there. It's our legacy from my great great grandfather, we're still trying to determine where his gravesite is. But his wife and the lineage that came from there, my elders, my grandparents, my great aunts, they all are buried in that family.
So
You know.
maybe someday, depending on who lasts longer, you or me, maybe someday I get to visit you there.
Yeah. And I thought we might have given you a tour, but I guess that didn't happen.
Uh-huh. Well, no, I remember like during break or something. I remember at the end of the class too, we had a fish fry, which was like really
Yeah.
tasty and like real authentic Virginia thing to do, I guess. And I remember walking around between the tombstones. It was just like right there. There's no
Yeah.
fence around them, you know?
Yeah. So it's still, in fact, I'm looking for or trying to create a proposal for funding to do something with that land.
Yeah, I remember there was like multiple meters and you wanted to do a mini grid. And I was
Yes.
like, well, it gets a little bit complicated because if you want to connect all of these different meters together where they are already connected together, it's already owned by the utility. So it's not super easy unless, you wanted to like make separate connections and things like that. Then unfortunately too, in certain places, like every state's different, there's laws protecting utilities. So, like where I am, I don't even think I can legally put an extension cord over the fence because there's laws that protect utilities are being the sole
Yeah.
suppliers of
Yeah.
electricity.
Right.
Uh,
Well, Blake and I have been discussing it on a regular basis of a potentially a microgrid. And I do have a contact at the local utility company, which is the Central Virginia Electric Cooperative, CVIC. And we're looking to reach out to them to see how we can make this happen. Like, not specifically on our homestead property, but I have 5 houses, like I told you before, connected, that they're all my cousins.
huh.
That if we could create something like a community solar utilizing those 5 houses and that we give back to CVET and they will reduce their utility bill.
And so we mentioned Dominion. Maybe we could explain what Dominion is. They're the utility, right?
Yeah, their utility, they're a conglomerate,
Uh huh.
right here. And they're not the largest, ironically, in the state of Virginia. Tappahannock Electric Co-op is the largest,
Mm-hmm.
where they're in 22 counties throughout the state. But Dominion pretty much is in control of everything through the SCC, of getting a profit, and providing solar. They've coined the market on
Mm-hmm.
solar here in Virginia, pretty much. So anything that happens with solar is predominant through Dominion,
Mm-hmm.
which is like, I don't like it, but, we're still working on how we can get around it.
And then is Dominion doing lots of like fossil fuels, natural gas, coal, all that stuff?
They put it all in one big basket and call it clean energy.
All right.
Yeah, that's how they justify,
Uh,
doing these transmission lines all throughout the state, that they're producing clean energy. They don't separate solar, whether it be residential, commercial, industrial, or large scale, along with oil and fracking. They pull it all together and basically call it clean energy.
uh-huh.
Yeah, so that's why there's a never-ending fight between environmental groups and Dominion and the State Corporation Commission, as well as the General Assembly, you know. So right now, there was a bill submitted in the General Assembly that utilities can bypass the local government, like the County Board of Supervisors, in order to put utility scale solar throughout the state without them having to have any say so in who can and who can't.
Mm.
They have to go through the planning commission as well as permitting, and a lot of them have been denied, to be able to build utility scale solar farms. That has become arguments all over the state regarding utility scale solar.
Hmm. And so, what your organization does, you have a nonprofit called Bridging the Gap, and you are educating, you're giving opportunities to returning citizens mostly. Is that correct?
Mostly, and I need to
Hmm.
correct you.
Mm-hmm.
because there are several Bridging the Gaps that do different things. Our organization is called Bridging the Gap in Virginia. That's the name of the organization. It's not that it's just located in Virginia, but it's the title of the organization.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've been since 2009. I started this organization after I came home from prison. And mind you, I had a college degree and 10 years of middle management experience. And I had a challenge with getting gainfully employed because of my conviction. So that's what the impetus was for me to start this organization, was because I know there's individuals that were coming out of prison that barely had a GED,
Mm-hmm.
and they would have even more barriers to overcome in order to get gainfully employed, in order to get housing, in order to be reintegrated back in society. So I've been in the initial first 5, 6, 7 years, I was a statewide volunteer for Virginia Department of Corrections, where I went and did public speaking in most of the prisons, the facilities in the state of Virginia. And then we're able to make connections with individuals that had resident or housing service providers, and was able to put people in housing when they get incarcerated, transitional housing, and then help them with, reintegrating back to society, being able to direct them for employment, or just to be able to do daily living skill building. I had guys coming out that had spent 30, 40 years in prison and had no clue of, what would life be like outside of institutions. Where I had one guy that we went to Walmart, and he just stood there where the cold cereal was and picked up three different types of cereal and kept putting them back on the shelf, picking up one, putting it, and that's as a result of being institutionalized. He had no clue what to do when it came to shopping, no clue what to do when it came to preparing food, so a lot of these guys, like I said, they're in their 60s and been in prison for 20 years or more. They're like confused
Mm-hmm.
on what to do next. So that's how I was able to support and assist a lot of individuals.
Yep. And just for people that don't know, returning citizens is a term for people that have been incarcerated and then they're returning to like the public. And so it sounds like you're kind of like started off being like a sort of a motivational speaker for getting people to get back into society and, lead productive, meaningful lives. And you've dedicated your life to that. And I think it's very noble what you've been doing and getting all these people to lead productive lives, so like when they get back they can have something to do, they could survive, so they don't end up being homeless, and so it's not so difficult to get jobs. And one of the ways too to get jobs, I think, is studying hard, getting that NABCEP associate and helping get a job. So
Yeah, and that's one of my proudest moments. I probably have about maybe 7 to 8 guys and women that has successfully passed the NAPSET, and they were formerly incarcerated individuals. And they did well. They're doing well. So our goals and objectives were reached in helping, because this is one industry in solar that a background check is not as intense as if you were going into a retail store and filling out an application, because a lot of the work is outside. So it's not like you're going to be in the company of going into someone's residence,
mm-hmm.
So this industry has been very favorable with hiring individuals that might have a criminal background.
So you said it was about 7 people. Do you want to give one or a few examples of, the pathways that they took and where they are right now leading successful lives?
In fact, we just recently were contracted to lay 1,100 panels on a commercial site. And out of those 12 people that we had, 3 of them returning citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And they're excited to get to work in the industry. So we're going to be giving them, all the possibilities of employment in those areas. I had my first class here in Richmond, and I don't know if you might remember them. One guy was Angel. Both of them were Latino, and they never took the NAPSET, but they got hired on the spot as a result of me inviting industry leaders in the solar business to the luncheon that I do.
Yeah, at the end of the class. Yep.
Yeah, at the end of the class. And they hired these two guys right off the bat. One is working in construction, the other one is working in at risk youth, but they did get hired in the solar industry and picked up additional skills, but they chose to go in a different route. And I'm okay with that because it got them thinking of what to do next or where to move forward to. This is a free class. Based on grants and funding that we receive, we've been able to offer this training and certification for free. We cover all the cost for the training, the 40 hours, the NAPCEP prep, we cover the NAPCEP exam, and we cover the cost for the minimally OSHA 10 certification. So this is anywhere between $1,200 and $1,500 per person that they're getting for free.
And so people could find out about it at your website. And I think you have a couple of different URLs, but Bridging the Gap Virginia. So BTGVA.
That's
It is at .org or .com?
.org.
.org.
Yeah, www.btgva.org.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Just like you said. Okay. And we'll put that in the show notes too. And are there requirements to where people have to be from to go into the class? They have to be from Richmond. They have to be from Virginia.
I've gotten away from that. It was designated for them to be from Richmond. And that was based on the grant funding that we received, that it was specific to the Richmond area. However, anything beyond the grant, or we were able to justify that we could open it up to anyone. So they just won't be eligible for the additional services that our partner, which is the City of Richmond's Office of Community Wealth Building, which is a workforce development program, they wouldn't be eligible for those services if they lived outside of it, didn't have a Richmond address, but they can get the training.
Yeah, and so I guess like getting grants is a whole different world from what most people are dealing with. And it's something that I would like to learn more about. And I know that you're an expert at getting the grants. And so a lot of grants have different things where you like the students have to be from different places or what you're going to do the training based on. I think I was talking to you recently and you were saying something like you logged in about one of your grants and the new administration canceled it or what was it? You saw like your computer screen was like canceled or like delayed or what?
Yeah, that has been disheartening, and we're still feeling the effects of that. We applied and was prepared to submit the grant by the deadline of it was in last month. And when we went to hit submit, a big yellow border banner came across the screen saying that we are unable to provide funding for this at this point in time as a direct result of Executive Order 21, which was Donald Trump's Executive Order 21. And so those grants were removed from grants.gov. So you couldn't even go back to grants.gov and look them up.
And so you were like logged in and doing all this application. And I think these applications, they're very intensive, right? You could spend like weeks or months working on an application and then you push submit and then it just says, forget it.
There were two grants, two environmental grants we applied for. One was a community change grant, which you provided us with a letter of support for. And then the other one, when we went to that, they directed us to this other grant called Thriving Communities. That's the one that we attempted to submit and were told that we could not submit it. And then there were two reentry grants, for individuals coming out of incarceration through the Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance that did the same thing. So in the process of, a month and a half, 45 days, we lost out on 4 potential grants.
Jeez.
Yeah. So right now we're looking at foundations, we're looking at private entities, we're looking at small or corporations that are willing to give funding for whatever amount. We're putting in applications after applications after applications.
And is that like a good portion of your job is trying to get funding, I guess?
Yes, very big portion. You've met Blake. Blake does the trainings. He does the instruction. I work at finding the funding, meeting the right people to help get us through,
Yep.
to move forward.
Yeah, and then like I said, it's like kind of a soap opera because then there's other people that are trying to get the same funding, and some of them were, I think, they work for you, and then they go off and do it on their own, and
Yeah.
uh-huh.
Yeah, I had that issue, and I'm not as trusting of people anymore,
Mhm.
as a result of these folk that came into my training and I wasn't smart, legal smart at the time to have them commit to a non-disclosure agreement or a non-competition or what is the other ended protection?
Non-compete.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. So, and they moved on with their organization doing what they learned through and you met her,
Yeah.
when you
Mhm.
came up to Union Hill, so yeah, so I don't trust a whole lot of folk these days. I just don't, because I have to be protective of the brand.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. So I'm not from the South, and it's interesting for me to go to the South. And one of the things that I noticed when I was going there to teach one of your classes, it might have been the first time I go into like just like a drugstore for like a CVS or a Rite Aid or something like that. And there's just some guy with a gun on his holster walking through the store. And it was just like really weird for me. And then everybody in the class is like, oh, that's just normal around here. And it didn't look like somebody like a cop or anything. It was more like a gunslinger or something.
Oh yeah, it's happening.
And then you took me around, and I think it was Charlottesville, happened not too long before I was there. And you took me to some place, and there was like a statue of, was like a slave owner or something in town. And we drove by that, and it was kind of like famous at the time. Was that in Virginia?
I think where I took you was Lumpkin's jail,
Mm.
as well as the auction site where slaves were being auctioned, bought and sold.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the history of Richmond,
Mm-hmm.
not just Virginia, but of Richmond,
Mm-hmm.
where individuals were being bought and sold as slaves.
Okay, yeah. And then there was like I think like a traffic circle with, I thought there was like a statue in the middle that was, I can't remember exactly what it was, but
Oh, okay. They had the statues of the Confederacy.
yeah, okay. Yep.
Yeah, and that became national news because folk were there trying to get them to tear it down, and they were putting graffiti all over those.
Yeah, that was it. I remember like taking pictures of it.
Yeah,
So is it still there?
no, it got taken down.
Okay, yep. And then Charlottesville is in Virginia, and it's just kind of famous now as being Charlottesville because there was some kind of protest, and then I think that the president was saying there's good people on both
Both
sides or
sides.
something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, they had over 100 individuals, not in sheets, but in khakis and shirts, and walking through the University of Virginia campus with what do you call those flames? They just marched through,
Uh-huh.
and they were Ku Klux Klan. Yeah, and then you're talking about in the 21st century, you still got, they're not in white robes or hoods anymore. They're walking around dressed like you and I, and that's when they were on the campus of UVA and Donald Trump was saying, and the one young lady got killed, and Donald Trump said there were good people on both sides,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Crazy.
so racism still exists in the state of Virginia.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, now when you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're getting shut down. So we have to rewrite any of our proposals to not include anything talking about DEI.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to get looked at. If, and they're not biting their tongue. These Fed reviewers and federal grant entities through grants.gov, sam.gov, they're going to reject your application as soon as they see that language in there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So it's been an interesting ride up to this point, and I'm grateful. We do have a one funder that has been funding us for the past 5 years, 6 years, a renewable grant,
Mm-hmm.
so that has been keeping us afloat in between other funding.
Yep. And then another thing that we have in common is we have both run for office and not won. And so we didn't have to do all the, the really boring stuff of sitting on a city council or a county council or Congress or whatever.
Yeah.
so, so
You do your homework, Sean. I respect that.
uh,
As a result of my felony conviction in Virginia, you lose your rights if you're a felon. You lose the right to vote. You lose the right to sit on a jury. You lose the right to become a public notary, and you lose the right to become,
elected official.
yeah, to run
Uh,
for public office.
yeah. Unless you're president.
Yeah, See, well, let me start with this, and then I'll get to that.
Uh-huh.
But when I came home from prison, and I found out that I could no longer vote, I became angry, and so that's when I went full steam ahead, advocating for that change for
Mm-hmm.
individuals coming out of prison, to get their rights restored, one, and to be able to vote.
Mm.
I wasn't thinking about public office or anything of that nature. I just, because it was embedded in me from my grandmother that we vote when we turn 18,
Mm-hmm.
and I voted every election, local, state, and national since I turned 18. And so I got my rights restored in 2012 by then a Republican governor, and then he told me that you have those rights restored back to you. So that's when I started advocating to get others to get their rights restored.
How did he give you your rights to vote again?
You had to put in an application.
So it was just like an individual basis.
It was an individual basis that the governor would make a decision on. Initially, I submitted it in 2010 and I got denied. And then in 2012, without me resubmitting, they reached out to me, and that's when I got my rights restored
Great.
by Bob McDonnell.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And is that a common thing? Like, are there other people that get their rights restored often, or is it very few people?
As a result of the previous two governors, Governor McCullough and Northam, they did a mass signing for individuals to get their rights restored.
Mm-hmm.
McCullough did like 275,000. Northam did like close to 100,000.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Okay. Yeah. And so that allowed for individuals on a wider scale to have their rights restored and be able to vote.
Mm-hmm.
I probably, which I put out in anything in discussion or wherever I'm at, that I probably assisted over 10,000 individuals to get their rights restored. I went on a mission once my rights were restored, and I was a part of the both governors' stakeholders group, advisory group.
Uh-huh.
My big pet peeve, I was grateful that they put out these executive orders to restore these folks' voting rights, but they did nothing to promote it, nothing to, as far as outreach throughout the state to let folk know that their rights had been automatically restored by these governors. So that's where me and several other grassroots organizations, we went throughout the state and mobilizing individuals to let them know that they can get their rights restored or their rights had been restored, without them having to submit an application where he just did a blanket restoration of rights, both governors, a blanket
Mm-hmm.
restoration of rights throughout the state of Virginia. And there's still to this day now more than 100,000 or better of individuals that are not aware that their rights were restored back in 2016
Wow.
by Governor McCullough
How did they check to see if their rights are restored?
on their website,
Mm-hmm.
on the Secretary of the Commonwealth's website. And you can check your status on their website under restoration of rights.
Yeah, because some people are probably afraid to vote because they're just thinking that they might get in trouble. Well,
You get locked up. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I regret that none of these administrations did anything to outreach to let
Hmm.
folk know that you can go online and find out and you can see that your rights have been restored.
Okay, maybe in the show notes we'll put a link to where people could find out.
Sure.
So could we find your name there on that website? Because your rights were restored, so you should be there, or was they?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm there. Yeah.
Okay.
If you were to check the status, yeah.
Hmm. Okay,
Hmm.
great.
Yeah.
Well, you've done a lot of things to make a difference.
Yeah, and I ran for office just because, when they told me that my rights were restored, they told me I have the right to vote, I have the right to be a public notary, I have the right to sit on the jury, and I have a right to run for office. Just because they said I can, I ran for public office, to let folk know that this is possible, even though you might have had a felony conviction.
I always try to look at the bright side of things, and if you never got in trouble in the first place, then you would have never came to where you are right now and never helped all these tens of thousands or people get their voting rights and all that kind of stuff. So it's like what seemed like a bad thing at the time turned out to be like really good for society and for you. It gave you a meaning in life and a path and a career. And get all these people with their NABCEP.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I've gotten with acceptance, Sean, that everything happened the way it was supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That has me where I'm at today. Yeah. Yeah. I've gotten acceptance. I used to like get jealous or get upset because I took the wrong turn growing up. And like all my friends and fraternity brothers, they're all doing well, they're successful, but I've gotten with acceptance that it was already ordained for me to have gone through what I went through to get where I'm at today.
Mm-hmm. And I think in the solar industry, there is a big theme of people reinventing themselves because the solar industry hasn't been around like it is now. It's grown so fast.
Yeah.
It just like keeps doubling every couple of years. And so that creates so many more jobs. So most people in the solar industry have had previous careers where they reinvented themselves. And also kind of just makes me think of too is today is April Fool's Day. So but we haven't said any lies yet, I don't think. But just in case, because this won't be released for a while, but a friend of mine's daughter just won the world champion figure skating contest in the Boston Garden over there. Her name's Alysa Liu, and she was in the Olympics and she retired and all the stress with coaches telling her what to do. And she decided
Yeah.
to start back again and come out of retirement to do it her way, and she won, and it was like tearjerker. It's on YouTube. And so another person, I mean, she's only 19, but she came out of retirement. Hard to believe somebody could come out of, and she did it her way, and it was like she did the best run of her life during competition, which is kind
What was
of
this past weekend?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
hmm,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I saw glimpses of it, but there was a whole lot of sports going on, so I didn't stay focused on that because the March Madness was on, the women's tournament was on, and then
Mm.
I'm a avid golf enthusiast, so the golf match was on. So I'm flicking from all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so her name's Alyssa Liu, and she won. And also in the Olympics, it was a little bit of like it got in the news and stuff because her father is from China, and he couldn't go back to China because he's a refugee. He was one of the organizers of students during that time in '89. When the
Women's Square.
yeah, he was doing it in a different city, but he was one of the organizers of it was happening in more places than just the Tiananmen Square. And so he got in the news for that, and, refugee, he's an attorney, and I'm having lunch with him tomorrow.
Cool.
And then also another thing that's interesting is it's in the news, so it's not a secret, is his kids are all surrogates. So he's the father. And so it's a different way of doing things. And she turned out to be, a world champion. Who knows? It might have been the best ever performance that anybody ever gave for like women's figure skating. So we'll put that in the show notes too. And it's just about reinventing ourselves. And
Okay.
we've all done it.
Yeah.
And you've done it. I've done it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know,
He did it. His daughter did it.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So it seems to kind of be a theme. And I've done a lot of like classes for you and for different people, like grid alternatives and stuff that have a lot of returning citizens. I did a bunch in Boston, actually, right near the garden last year. And I seem to get along really well with returning citizens. So like I just enjoy myself. They're a lot more fun than your regular student, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
They don't have a problem talking about where they're at and how to reinvent themselves.
yeah.
And that you're teaching the solar is helping them to reinvent themselves.
Yeah, and it's like even if you change one life, it's worth it. And you change in a bunch of lives. And there are some people in the classes, you know, that are not paying attention as much, but you know, they live harder lives, but you can't expect to save everyone, but you save some of them, you know.
I'm with acceptance with that. You know,
Mhm.
I used to get frustrated because individuals would come to the class not really wanting to be in the class, not motivated, and, disrupt the class. It doesn't make sense. You're getting something for free to help you,
Mhm.
to change the direction of your life, but you don't want to grasp hold of it and use it to your advantage to move forward.
Mhm.
So I used to get frustrated, but I don't. Just like what
Yeah.
you just said, I
Mm.
can't help everybody.
But
Yeah.
but you can help a lot of people. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of these
Yeah.
folk think that, you're supposed to give them something. At the beginning of each one of my trainings, when introducing myself, I tell them, I says, I'm from New Jersey. And I said, when I came to Virginia, they told me I was coming to Richmond, Virginia, not Gimme, Virginia.
Mm.
And I says, I can't give you anything. So don't say, well, Mr. Walker, you said you was going to give me a job. I am not telling you that. I'm not giving you anything. We will help you. We're here to help you to get there, but there's a part you have to play in it.
Yeah, and some of the things too that people learn in the classes. I mean, I think like the most important things for getting a job isn't even the stuff that we're learning, the technical stuff, but it's
Mhm.
like following through. And so that's another good thing. Like when they pass the
Yeah.
associate exam, they
Yeah.
followed through with something. They followed through with studying, they followed through with
Yeah.
taking the exam and showing up for the exam and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of things that are really important that you can't, you know, like you're saying, you can't just give it to somebody. You can't give somebody study habits. They have to take the time themselves. They have to show up themselves, you know. And for some people, maybe with the ones that aren't paying attention, you know, they're usually younger than not, and they're just maybe not their time. And the next time around, you know, it just takes a few times, something like
I
that.
probably have a running list of about 300 individuals that
Mm-hmm.
we reached out to over the years for the training that they agreed and said yes to the training, but didn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
didn't show up. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. We keep a database with all those individuals.
That happens for everybody. I remember, like, I don't know, 15 years ago, even a friend of mine, he still is an in phase trainer, and he would say that if they gave a free class, most people didn't show up. If they
Wouldn't show up.
charged them, most people show up.
Right,
and,
right, right.
and like I've even noticed that for my classes, the more somebody pays, the more they get out of it a lot of times, you know.
Yeah. We need to go in that route, because of what's going on in the feds, but I'm trying to prolong it as long as possible.
Yeah. And they call it the solar coaster, so there's just ups and
So,
downs.
yeah,
And I think sometimes that when you're having a down on the solar coaster, it just gets rid of some of the weeds a little bit out. Then when you make it through the down, then on your way up, you're the stronger one, you know. So it,
yeah. So I've been doing this since 2009. I haven't
mhm,
gone anywhere yet. I haven't
mhm,
folded. You know what I mean? It
mhm,
hasn't beat me down yet. So as long as I can have breath in me and able to do it, we're going to keep going.
great, great. Yeah, I remember one of my classes I taught for you in Richmond. It was like at City Hall or something or close to there.
Yeah, right in City Hall.
And then I was on my way to go to Angola to do some
Yeah.
consulting, and you were driving that direction anyway. And so you dropped me off at the Dulles Airport, which is closer to DC over there. And so we got to know each other.
Yeah.
So I think somebody else was riding with us, a woman and another social justice advocate, I think. But we had a good ride. So
That was after the second training.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yep. Yeah.
yeah. The first one was in Union Hill, and then the next one was at the same folk, the Office of Community Wealth Building,
Uh-huh. Yep.
in their office. I've been a partner with them since 2013.
Mm-hmm.
So I've pretty much been on their payroll since 2013.
Great, great. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really good. So let's see, what else do we want to talk about, or should we, until next time?
Next time.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Appreciate it. But you can call on me again. I'd be glad to come on the podcast.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll do it for sure. And yeah, keep up the good, noble work and keep on being a saint. And I'm sure that your great great grandfather is smiling down upon you for all that you've done. And so thank you so much.
You are a definitive point in this whole process. You
Hmm.
know, if I'd never met you, I wouldn't be so involved in solar as well as renewable energy jobs. So I thank you.
All right. Thank you, Richard
All
Walker.
right, Sean.
And thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. To find out more, go to solarsean.com. And we're going to put all these great links in the show notes, especially for people that know people in Virginia that want to work with Bridging the Gap Virginia, whether it be helping Richard Walker get some money to do some of his great work, or for people that want to go through his program and receive the benefits for some of Richard's great work. So thanks so much, Richard
Thank you.
Walker. Woo!